In the ancient world, where names rise and fall like dust in the wind, there is one name that refuses to fade, one figure who steps out of the shadows of Scripture with an authority that feels older than time itself. Melchizedek. He appears like a whisper from another dimension, a presence that unsettles historians, mystics, and believers alike, because nothing about him fits inside the normal boundaries of human history. Before we plunge into the depths of this mystery, tell me in the comments from which country you are watching this video, and subscribe if you want more deep spiritual stories that most channels never dare to explore. Now, let us begin. He is called the King of Righteousness, the King of Salem, the priest of the Most High God, yet his story begins with silence. No birth, no childhood, no lineage. In a world obsessed with genealogy and ancestral authority, the writings introduce him without a single clue about where he came from. It is as if he walked directly out of eternity into a moment that would alter the course of spiritual history forever. Scholars have spent centuries trying to understand why the ancient text breaks its own rules for this one man. Was this silence accidental? Or was it a deliberate signal that Melchizedek belonged to a realm beyond mortal categories? The earliest writings treat him not as a tribal leader or a political ruler, but as a being whose authority is woven into the very order of creation. His introduction is brief, but it hits like thunder, raising more questions than answers, and pulling anyone who studies him into a labyrinth of secrets that stretch across millennia. The first and most dramatic event involving Melchizedek is his sudden encounter with Abraham, a moment described with such economy that it becomes even more mysterious. Abraham, returning from battle, is met by this unfamiliar king who brings bread and wine and blesses him with divine authority. But what makes the scene even stranger is that Abraham, the great patriarch, the man chosen by God to father nations, responds to Melchizedek with reverence. He offers him a tenth of everything, a gesture normally reserved for divine representatives. And yet the text never pauses to explain why Abraham recognized this figure or how he understood his authority. It leaves the moment hanging in the air like a riddle. Some scholars argue that Melchizedek was simply a righteous king whose reputation preceded him. Others whisper that Abraham recognized something far greater, that he sensed a presence untouched by the limits of time. The silence surrounding their meeting becomes part of the puzzle, forcing us to ask whether Melchizedek was just a king or perhaps a messenger from a realm beyond the human world. Ancient commentaries point to the symbolism of the bread and wine, suggesting hidden meanings linked to spiritual authority, cosmic order, and a priesthood older than humanity itself. Every detail of this encounter invites speculation and wonder, and with each question, the mystery deepens. What makes Melchizedek even more extraordinary is what the later writings reveal about his priesthood. He is described as the priest of the Most High God, long before the Hebrew priesthood was ever established. Even more shocking, his priesthood is described as eternal, not dependent on lineage or ritual, but on a cosmic appointment that predates the laws, the prophets, and the entire religious structure that would later dominate the ancient world. This means that Melchizedek's priesthood stands outside the boundaries of time and history, a spiritual authority that existed before Moses, before the temple, before the traditions that defined ancient religious life. Some writings suggest that he was the guardian of heavenly knowledge, the keeper of mysteries that humans were not yet prepared to understand. Others portray him as a figure whose priesthood reflects the divine order itself, a link between the human world and the eternal realm. His role forces us to rethink how ancient people understood divine authority and spiritual hierarchy. Why would the texts elevate this obscure king above the most important priests of history? Why place him at the foundation of an eternal priesthood? These questions have echoed for centuries, inspiring countless interpretations and debates, yet none of them fully solve the puzzle. Melchizedek remains a figure who disrupts every category, a reminder that not all ancient mysteries were meant to be neatly explained, and some were designed to draw us deeper into the unknown. When the ancient psalm writer invoked the name of Melchizedek after centuries of silence, it was like reopening a doorway that had been sealed since the dawn of sacred history. With a single line, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek," the mystery surged back into the spiritual imagination of humanity. This was not a casual reference, not a poetic flourish, but a deliberate declaration that tied an unnamed future figure to a priesthood older than the world's greatest religious institutions. Suddenly, Melchizedek was no longer an isolated character from the age of Abraham. He became part of a prophecy, a link between the past and the future, a symbol of eternal authority, untouched by corruption or decay. Scholars throughout the ages have argued fiercely over why this psalm resurrects his name, wondering what the writer knew that others had ignored. Was Melchizedek a model of perfect spiritual leadership, or was he something more, a glimpse of a cosmic priesthood woven into the structure of reality itself? The language of forever is not used lightly in ancient scripture. It implies an existence not bound by birth or death, a role that cannot be inherited or replaced, a priesthood that continues even when kingdoms crumble and temples fall. This single verse created a shockwave through every generation that encountered it, opening the door to interpretations that range from the earthly to the supernatural. Some read it as symbolic, a poetic nod to spiritual purity. Others see it as a bold hint that Melchizedek's presence did not end with his brief appearance in Abraham's story. And there are those who believe the verse points to an entirely different reality, one in which Melchizedek is not a historical figure at all, but a being whose existence is anchored in eternity. This growing mystery gained even more weight when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, revealing writings that had been sealed away for 2,000 years. Hidden among caves and cliffs, untouched by empire or revision, these ancient texts depicted Melchizedek in ways that stunned scholars and ignited global fascination. In these writings, Melchizedek is not simply a righteous king or a priest of the Most High God. He appears as a heavenly deliverer, a cosmic judge, a being who stands at the center of the final battle between light and darkness. One scroll describes him as the one who proclaims liberty to captives, forgives debts, and crushes wicked spiritual forces, suggesting a role far beyond what any earthly king could accomplish. Another portrays him as presiding over the heavenly court, judging both angels and nations with divine authority. This portrayal elevates Melchizedek to a level that blurs the line between human and celestial, between historical figure and supernatural warrior. Some groups within the Qumran community treated Melchizedek as a messianic figure, a redeemer who would bring justice at the end of days. To them, Melchizedek was not a memory but a destiny. These writings reveal that ancient people saw him not as a footnote in Scripture, but as a cosmic force whose influence stretched across ages. The scrolls challenge everything readers assumed about the boundaries of ancient belief. They blur categories, merging prophecy, mysticism, and spiritual warfare into a single figure who seems to operate both inside and above the human narrative. It becomes clear that Melchizedek was not merely preserved in the minds of the faithful. He was expected to return, to act, to judge, to liberate. His story was not over. It had not even fully begun. This leads to some of the most startling interpretations found in ancient commentaries, which dare to suggest that Melchizedek never died. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, but literally. They point to the statement that he remains a priest forever, arguing that if his priesthood has no end, then perhaps his life has no end either. This idea created a waterfall of speculation. Some traditions claim he was preserved by divine power, hidden until the appointed time. Others go further and propose that Melchizedek was never mortal in the first place, but an eternal being who took human form to guide early humanity. A few ancient writings even describe him as originating from the heavenly realm, descending to earth temporarily before returning to his cosmic position. These texts raise questions that stretch the imagination. Was Melchizedek an angelic ruler sent to establish a divine order on earth? Was he a celestial guardian whose identity humans could barely comprehend? Or was he a manifestation of divine purpose, a living symbol of eternal priesthood? The theories grow more dramatic as different traditions attempt to explain his timeless role. Some early mystics believed he was the angel of righteousness, a being who serves as the cosmic counterpart to the forces of darkness. Others saw him as a bridge between the human and the divine, a figure whose presence reveals a hidden architecture underlying spiritual authority. The idea that Melchizedek may still exist somewhere in a realm beyond human perception continues to captivate readers and believers. It suggests that his brief appearance in history was not a random event, but a momentary unveiling of a greater truth. If Melchizedek's priesthood truly has no beginning and no end, then his mystery is not something to be solved. It is a doorway, an invitation to explore the hidden dimensions of ancient spiritual thought, where the boundaries between heaven and earth grow thin, and the possibilities expand far beyond the limits of human understanding. Across centuries, the debate over Melchizedek transforms from a scholarly discussion into a storm of competing visions, each one trying to define a figure who refuses to be contained by any single category. Some ancient thinkers insist he was simply a historical king, righteous and wise, whose unusual introduction in Scripture caused later generations to elevate him beyond human proportions. They argue that his reputation grew as cultures layered symbolism onto his name, turning a noble leader into something legendary. But this explanation only satisfies those who are comfortable reducing mysteries to mundane origins. Others cannot escape the sense that Melchizedek's story is too precise, too charged, too deliberately shrouded to belong to any ordinary human. These groups believe he was an angel in human guise, an emissary sent to guide early humanity during a critical moment in spiritual history. Their view draws on writings that describe Melchizedek, with titles usually reserved for heavenly beings, making him sound less like a mortal king and more like a guardian from another realm. Yet even this is not the most daring interpretation. Some ancient traditions present Melchizedek as a being so radiant, so pure, so untouched by earthly corruption that he stands outside the hierarchy of angels entirely. According to these views, Melchizedek is not lesser than the angels, but a figure whose authority rivals or even surpasses their own. And then, on the far edge of theological imagination, there are those who suggest that Melchizedek is something else entirely, a manifestation of divine presence in human form, sent not as a messenger, but as a living doorway between heaven and earth. These interpretations resist every attempt to simplify them, creating a mosaic of cosmic possibilities in which Melchizedek becomes a mirror reflecting the deepest beliefs of each generation. No matter which view one embraces, the debate reveals something profound. Every tradition, no matter how different, agrees on one thing: Melchizedek is bigger than history, bigger than any earthly title. A figure who unsettles boundaries and forces humanity to confront the idea that not all ancient mysteries fit neatly into human categories. As time passed, Melchizedek's identity seeped into traditions far beyond those found in sacred scripture. Gnostic writings, mystical texts, and esoteric groups all began weaving him into their secret teachings, each one expanding his legend with layers of symbolism and hidden meaning. In some Gnostic manuscripts, Melchizedek is described as a being of pure light, untouched by corruption, a figure whose nature is so elevated that he serves as a model for spiritual transformation. These writings portray him as the embodiment of truth and purity, the one who stands between the divine realm and the material world, offering a path toward higher knowledge. Medieval mystics and scholars, captivated by these ideas, began to describe rituals and contemplations invoking Melchizedek's name for wisdom, protection, and insight. Secret societies and esoteric brotherhoods adopted him as a patron of hidden knowledge, claiming that Melchizedek represented an unbroken line of spiritual authority that bypassed all earthly hierarchies. To them, Melchizedek was not merely a historical figure, but a symbol of enlightenment, a reminder that the deepest truths lie beyond institutional structures. Even in modern times, he appears in mystical writings, spiritual movements, and speculative theories that treat him as a guide for those seeking knowledge beyond the limits of ordinary understanding. What is remarkable is that these diverse traditions, separated by continents and centuries, all instinctively gravitated to Melchizedek as a central figure of purity and cosmic wisdom. They saw in him not only a priest and king, but a spiritual architect whose influence extends across religions, cultures, and eras. This widespread fascination reveals something essential about his character. Melchizedek defies ownership. No single tradition, no single culture, no single interpretation can claim to contain him completely. His mystery is universal, calling to anyone who seeks a deeper understanding of the unseen world. And that universality is what makes him one of the most compelling and enduring figures in the landscape of spiritual history. As we reach the culmination of these ancient writings, a pattern emerges that is impossible to ignore. Across every source, canonical, apocryphal, mystical, and esoteric, Melchizedek consistently represents a priesthood that transcends institutions, lineage, and time. Even though the scriptures speak of him briefly, the weight of his presence echoes across centuries, leaving scholars and seekers with the sense that his story is intentionally unfinished. Perhaps the mystery is more than a collection of ancient puzzles. Perhaps it is meant to provoke a deeper awareness of the spiritual architecture underlying reality. Melchizedek emerges not only as a historical or symbolic figure, but as a reminder that some truths were never meant to be fully explained. They were meant to be pursued. He becomes a doorway, inviting people to explore questions that lie beyond the boundaries of ordinary understanding. Why does a figure mentioned so few times exert such immense influence? Why is his priesthood described as eternal? Why do so many traditions, across thousands of years, treat him as a cosmic ruler rather than a mortal king? These questions do not point to a simple historical puzzle. They point to something layered, deliberate, and spiritually charged. Melchizedek stands as a symbol of the eternal order, a presence that transcends religious divisions and speaks to something universal in the human search for meaning. His role is not to provide answers, but to compel us to look deeper, to seek what lies beyond the surface of sacred texts and the boundaries of human knowledge. And perhaps that is why his shadow still falls across the ages. Not because he was forgotten, but because he was never meant to be fully understood. The mystery of Melchizedek persists because it invites us to explore the unknown, to consider that the world may hold forces and figures that exist outside the limits of recorded history. And in that exploration, we discover something profound about ourselves, the desire to reach beyond the visible, to uncover truths that resonate with a timeless rhythm, to find meaning in the spaces where history fades into legend and legend into eternity.